Hello Year 8, it's Mrs Reed here and welcome to the first lesson of your new topic, the point of poetry. The first thing that I would like you to do, please, is to make sure that you are ready to start the lesson. So that means checking that you are distraction free. Get rid of the phone, pop it on silent, place it in another room if you need to. Make sure that you have a pen or a pencil, something to write with. And also that you have some paper, whether it's line paper, a notepad or plain paper, so that you can record notes from this lesson. Okay, so we're ready to start. Well, the first thing we're going to do is to look back. We're going to be thinking about what did we learn about poems in Year 7 and how poems work. So this is one to get you retrieving information from your long-term memory. I've tried to give you some hints here to help you out, but have a go. Please don't worry if there's information that you've forgotten. We'll go through the answers in just a few minutes. So question 1. What do we call the pattern of rhymes at the end of each line in a poem or song? Number 2. What do we call the number of syllables in a line of poetry? Number 3. What do we call the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables within the lines of a poem? Number 4. What does this metaphorical phrase mean in literal language? Can you write it in your own words, showing what you understand? The phrase is this: he is a walking encyclopedia. Okay, pause the video, have a go at those questions. Okay, let's go through our answers. So number 1, the answer here was rhyme scheme. That's the pattern of rhymes that is used at the end of each line in a poem or a song. Number 2, line length, the number of syllables in a line of poetry. Number 3, the answer is metre, the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables within the lines of a poem. And number 4, well, you are asked here to think about metaphorical language. So that is language that is not literal. We know that metaphors work by comparing two things, but also implying additional layers of meaning. So in the phrase, he is a walking encyclopedia, you may have noticed that the thing that we wanted to describe, or the person in this case, he is our tenor. And he is being compared to being like an encyclopedia. So that's our vehicle, the imaginative idea that you compare it to help your audience understand it. Now, the ground, the things that the tenor and the vehicle have in common here are that an encyclopedia is a book that gives information on many subjects. So the connection between that and the person is really the idea of knowledge, saying that he is a knowledgeable person. In fact, he would be knowledgeable about many different topics. And perhaps we could even say that he therefore is able to provide lots of facts and information. Okay, please don't worry if you found some of those tricky to remember, that's okay. We will be covering each of these ideas again throughout this unit. But give yourself a mark out of 4, and really, really well done if you manage to get 3 or 4 marks correct. Okay, so let's do a bit of recapping prior learning. This bit's really important. Okay, this is the distinction between different types of writing. So the first one is called prose. Now prose is really everyday writing. When you're writing in your exercise books at school, when you're reading, say, a piece of non-fiction or even a fictional story, that writing will mainly be in what we call prose form. The language of prose is typically straightforward. It doesn't have much decoration. In prose, our ideas are contained in sentences, and those sentences are arranged into paragraphs. There are no line breaks. Sentences will run to the right margin. The first word of each sentence is capitalised. So prose looks like large blocks of words. Okay, in a moment I'll be asking you to pause the video. What I'd like you to do is read back through that information, particularly using the yellow highlighted text. I'd like you to write yourself 2 sentences. The first one will explain what prose is. The second will give 2 examples of the features of prose. There is a sentence stem at the bottom of the page to help you do this. Pause the video now. Okay, so just to check your answer, you may have said something here like, prose is everyday writing, or prose is straightforward writing. And you may have said that not only is it contained in sentences, but it also features a capital letter as the first word in each sentence. Okay, let's compare that to poetry. So poetry is different to prose. Typically it's reserved for expressing something special in a more creative or artistic way. The language of poetry tends to be more expressive, more decorated. It may include comparisons and metaphors, rhyme and rhythm, and that might contribute to a very different sound and feel to the writing. In poetry, our ideas are contained in lines that may or may not be in sentences. These lines are arranged into what we call stanzas. And the shape of poetry can really vary depending on the line length and the intention of the poet. Okay, so in a moment I would like you to pause the video and read back through the text, paying attention to those areas that are highlighted in yellow. Write yourself 2 sentences explaining what poetry is and 2 features of poetry. You can pause the video now. Okay, so you may have written like, poetry is a way of expressing something special in an artistic way. Not only does poetry have a different sound and feel, but also the shape of poetry can vary. Okay, so on to our new topic. I told you the topic was called The Point of Poetry. So this is how we're going to build on your understanding of what poetry is from Year 7. This time we're going to look at, well, why? Why do poets write poetry? And why do we, as a reader, study it? Why do we read it? What kinds of things about the world can we learn from poems? So poetry can be something really political. It could perhaps be trying to argue and action social change. Poetry can deal with really strong emotions. They might be universal emotions that everyone experiences, sometimes negative ones, such as grief and loss. Poems can also help us understand the experiences of others, people whose lives are different from our own, perhaps those in different countries, from different cultures and traditions. And poetry can also capture the human experience of important moments in history too. So we're going to be looking at all of these different ideas throughout this unit. Okay, so our starting topic is war poetry. We're going to look at war as what we call an ever-present of human history. And what that means is it's something that is always existing or occurring. It's always been there. So what you can see in front of you now are some images that represent a snapshot of some significant conflicts in British history. We know that there have been many more wars and conflicts around the world. So war poetry has a really long history of people writing about and expressing their feelings and experiences of events linked to war. Okay, let's look at a little bit of history here and a bit of context. I'm going to give you some clues to try and work out a text that you have studied previously in Year 7. So did you know that war poetry dates back to even before the ancient Greeks? In fact, an epic poem that you have studied is a really good example of war poetry. Okay, I want you to be thinking about this. I've got 2 more clues. It is believed to have been written by Homer. It also deals with the events of the Trojan War. Okay, do you know which text? You might like to write this down. Perhaps you could say it out loud on 3. 1, 2, 3. The Iliad. Okay, well done if you got that correct. So you have already studied some war poetry before. You'll have looked at the events in the Iliad. You would have looked at the poetic descriptions of Achilles and Patroclus. Okay, some more information about context then. This helps us to understand the significance of war poetry as a literary form. So war poetry can be written by a soldier. It may be written by somebody who has participated in a war and experienced the feelings of it firsthand. It could be written by a civilian, maybe even someone who is observing the war from a distance and writing about the conflict. War poetry, however, can be dated back as far as the Old Testament and ancient Greece. And it's not unique to British culture. All over the world, writers have expressed their feelings about and experiences of war through the medium of poetry. Although war poetry does have a long history, it's the young soldier poets of the First World War who have helped to establish war poetry as a literary genre. Their first-hand accounts of the struggle of life in the trenches has become some of the defining texts of the 20th century. War poetry continues to be written today, and studying it can help us to explore universal themes. Something that is universal affects everyone. So these are themes which are understood by people all around the world, regardless of their cultural differences. These universal themes include things such as identity, innocence and guilt, loyalty, courage, compassion, humanity, duty, desire and death. Okay, there's a lot of contextual information here, so you may wish to pause the video and read back through this text. There are some questions on the next slide. to help you show your understanding. Okay, 4 questions to write down the answers to, please. Number 1, which Greek text is an early example of war poetry? Number 2, who might write war poetry? You might want to think about, well, why? What might they tell us about war? 3, during which war did soldiers write poems about their experiences of life in the trenches? Number 4, list 3 universal themes or big ideas which war poetry might explore. Okay, pause the video and have a go at answering the questions. Okay, let's mark our answers. So number 1, well done if you got the answer was the Iliad. Number 2, well, anybody could write a war poem, but typically we might hear from soldiers and civilians. We might hear people's first-hand experiences. We might hear from people who perhaps have been affected or been victims of war. We might hear from those who are observing and watching as conflicts go on. Writers might therefore be able to give their opinions about whether they disagree with or support a particular war. Number 3, during which war did soldiers write poems about their experience in the trenches? Well done, if you got that correct, the answer was the First World War. Number 4, list 3 universal themes which war poetry might explore. Okay, now I've listed lots of them here, so we're asked to get 3 in total. So check your answers and give yourself a mark out of 4. Okay, so an introduction so far. We've looked at what you might already know about poetry. We've looked at the point of poetry, why we're going to be studying it this term. We've talked about war poetry as a genre and a little bit of its history. Finally, I would like you to do some research of your own. I shared with you some images linked to some significant conflicts in British history. You may wish to choose 1 or 2 of these conflicts and research 5 facts. In fact, it would be better if you looked at the war poets who might be linked to these conflicts too. For example, the First World War between 1914 and 1918. You could look for the names of poets who are responsible for writing war poetry around that time. Okay, it's up to you how you want to present this information. You could present it as a small fact file, a mind map, but once you've completed your work, I would like you to either take a photo of it and upload it to Show My Homework, or email it to your English teacher at their school email address. Okay, I hope that's been a useful introduction to the topic, and I look forward to working with you throughout the rest of the week. Thanks for listening. Bye!